Your property empire.
Hello and welcome to Your Property Empire. I'm Natalie MacDonald, filling in for Chris Gray. On tonight's show, what are the predictions for the 2018 property market? If you couldn't sell your property last year, what can you do to have better luck this year? And where are the bargain suburbs if you want to buy an affordable property in 2018? Well, joining us tonight in studio is Derek Taylor, New South Wales Sales Manager at realestate.com.au, and Charles Tarbey, Chairman and owner of Century 21 Australasia. Gentlemen, great to have you with us here this evening, particularly as 2018 is starting to get the ball rolling a little bit, but we're still very much looking to assess 2017, where the good spots were, where the not so good spots were. Derek, I'll start with you in terms of, I guess, assessing the final few weeks of 2017. What was the most read article? What was it that visitors to realestate.com.au were most looking to?
Yeah, our most read article over the Christmas period was around the most sought-after suburbs nationally, and this was a very popular article, and it was quite interactive, and people could go in and have a look at whether their suburb was high in demand or the most popular or the most.
Now, is this just arguments over the Christmas dinner over my suburb is better than your suburb, or I mean, realistically, why do people look to this at the end of the year over Christmas?
Look, I'm a bit biased, and I think my suburb's probably the most sought after. But when you have a look at the data, and it's based on demand, number of properties within a particular location, and the actual number of visits those properties actually receive. So it can give people either a good indication in terms of, look, that's a suburb I might like to move to, or if I'm looking at buying in a particular suburb, that's a suburb that I'd actually like to purchase in.
So what were some of the hot and not suburbs then?
Yeah, look, Victoria actually took out 7 of the top 10 suburbs nationally, and followed by Tasmania and South Australia. New South Wales unfortunately didn't feature in the top 10 nationally.
Interesting. Charles, does that match up with sort of what you were seeing trend-wise through the year?
I think a lot of people had given up on Sydney after the last couple of years. So when you look at the pricing of properties and the affordability issues and so on, naturally Hobart, South Australia and certainly parts of Melbourne are going to fare very strongly.
Well, with that in mind, I mean, how did 2017 finish up to you in terms of what you were seeing, some of the numbers on the tables, as it were?
Numbers were pretty good. There were people complaining about the numbers, but I think the stock levels started to rise towards the end, which is always a good indication that we're going to start with a more balanced market coming into the new year. Now, I think overall it was a very good real estate market. And what I mean by that is that the last few years we haven't had much of a real estate market. It's just been all over the place, no seasons at all. Anybody that wanted to buy, if they could, they would. It didn't matter whether it was raining or snowing or the sun was out. But this year, and particularly in the last few months, we've started off getting back into the seasons again. So I think it's going to be interesting watching what happens in spring, winter time, as we come through it.
With that in mind, I mean, the lead up to Christmas in the equity markets anyway, we often refer to it as being a Santa Claus rally. We see investors hopping in. Can the same be applied to the property market? A lot of people looking to get their houses and their properties sold off and away before the end of the year and before Christmas.
Certainly, and we talked about this, about the discretionary spending, about the holiday area. Certainly around this time of the year, there's a lot of people thinking, oh gee, I'd like to jump in and buy. But I find it a really interesting time, Christmas, because people come back with New Year's resolutions and they don't always meet expectations, and I think some people act on their emotions over Christmas and then 3 months later regret. So I always watch January with interest to see what happens out there, what sort of inquiries we get.
So seasonally speaking, what sort of activity would you expect in January?
Yeah, pretty good. This is not a bad time at all. A lot of people being transferred in and out. They look to buy. There's a lot of those people with those New Year's resolutions to get out and start to look to buy. There are a lot of buyers that couldn't get into the market. Now the talk is that there's opportunity for them coming up. So they're all starting to get out and have a good look.
And again, as long as those New Year's resolutions to save for their property deposit.
You got one too, didn't you?
What did
Around property?
We have several New Year's resolutions surrounding property. But that said, I mean, it always works as being a reflection on the year prior and how property sales did function and how that's setting the scene coming into a fresh year.
Yeah, look, I think 2017 was a tale of two halves. The first half was very strong, a lot of buyer demand, and then the second half sort of ended up in a little bit more subdued. But interestingly enough, there were still 177 properties that were sold at auction in the Saturday prior to Christmas, with those looking at trying to pick up that pre-Christmas bargain.
Of course. For those people then who are, because we've touched a little bit on those that might be looking to buy a property this year, and that might be on their agenda, but for those selling, we talk about this pre-Christmas, post-Christmas market. If you weren't able to sell your home before Christmas, is there something that you can do to, I don't know, rejuvenate your sales campaign into January?
Yeah, look, a lot of people need to really step out of the Christmas mess to start with and get their homes prepared for sale once again. I also recommend now in the weather that we have, that a lot of people do you get your twilight inspections, get them in the middle of the week, whereas a lot of people traditionally will do them on the weekends. So if you want to be a bit more competitive, I think you've also got to start thinking about your price. You need to go out and have a good look at what's for sale, what's in competition with you. Before it didn't matter, it matters significantly now.
Yeah, I agree with Charles. I think I'd be focusing on three key areas: the marketing of the property, the presentation of the property, and price. And in terms of marketing, New Year's a great time to reinvigorate the campaign, but you want to make sure you've got the strongest possible print, online and social media campaign. And it's all about casting the net to get access to the biggest possible audience and the biggest pool of buyers. And I've often heard Tom Penos say that records are broken at the Olympics wide because that's where the best competition is, and that's what you want to try and generate, the most amount of buyer activity for your property.
If it didn't sell before Christmas, there was a reason. And we always say there are only two reasons why a property doesn't sell. Either the price is too high or the marketing is poor. It can't be anything else. I mean, people say, oh, I was on a railway line. Well, it should be priced according to it being on a railway line.
I think in terms of price now, it's the market is a little bit more subdued. It's about not being overly ambitious, and it's making sure that if you are reinvigorating your property, bring it on in January, that your price is aligned with the current market expectations. And for those out there looking at selling or reinvigorating their campaign, they can go online, do their research, look at some recent sales, perhaps not go back too far, about 3 months, because the market's changing so quickly, and also look at some of the competition that's already on the market now in terms of where its pricing point is, so it's priced accordingly.
And to the point that we were discussing a little bit earlier, there's a different type of buyer potentially in the market come January as well. So again, you've got to reassess to that.
The buying market is changing, but again, that's because a lot more people can see the opportunity of coming back in again. There are a lot of people sat back at the middle of last year and said, I'm never going to get a property anymore, so I might as well just rent. I think that's changing. I think it's going to change very favourably for first home buyers this year. I think it's going to be a lot more affordable, and I hope they take advantage of it.
Well, I think we're already starting to see that. We're seeing more and more of the upgraders come back to the market because, as Charles said earlier last year, the market was very tight. So actually putting your property on for sale, if there's not a lot available for you to pick up, you tend to sit back and actually wait. But I think now as more and more stocks coming on, it's much more positive for those wanting to list their property and come back into the market.
And there is that level of optimism as well. If you are a buyer who has been looking pre-Christmas and post-Christmas, if you're seeing that a property that you were perhaps interested in early December is still online now and still available now, it sort of buoys you a little bit and certainly makes you feel more enthusiastic about that hunt.
And the news out too about CoreLogic, about certain locations dropping in price over the last quarter, and then there's that expectation that Sydney may drop 8 to 10%. I'm not sure. That should have my bet with the CEO of CoreLogic again, like I used to have. I'm not sure it's going to go that far, but I think there will be certainly a very balanced market, which means that if first-home buyers are moving upwards, they're saving more, their salaries are increasing, and prices are coming back a little. I also think rentals will be very competitive because a lot of investment properties coming on the market. So I think tenants will have lower rents, higher salaries, and slightly lower prices. So there's a few good things in their favour right now.
We've touched on if you're looking to sort of reinvigorate even your property campaign. What if you're looking to put your house on the market for the first time in 2018? What sort of timing should you be looking to, or when should you be avoiding perhaps starting your campaign?
Well, I think it really depends on the individual. If your property's well presented and you're ready to go, now's a good time to come onto the market. We're starting to come into the sort of February, April period, which is the second busiest period of the year. So if you're ready to go and it's well presented, I think now's a really good time. But if not, you might want to just wait until you do a few things around the house to make sure that it's looking its best, so that when you do go to market, you're standing out from the crowd and you're not caught up in that competitive bubble.
One of the most critical parts of it, though, is that if you're selling, you want to be buying in the same sort of market if that's what you're doing. So if you're selling now hoping that something might change somewhere else, you can get yourself into trouble. So it's all relative, and I think that those people that thought, oh, I'm going to get less for my property now in a few months' time, they're probably going to buy what they want to buy for less as well. So it's all relative, but it has to happen at the same time.
What are the tips then? And this sounds silly, but in hot weather, people want to go to the beach. They don't necessarily want to go and look at a property and sit in a home or sit in an auction with lots and lots of people. What are some of the tips for people who are listing in hot weather or in summer?
Sure. Well, we're coming into the end of summer, and it's generally the hottest months. So I think in particular in the afternoon. So I'd be looking at bringing the property on, whether it's an open for inspection or an auction, a bit earlier in the day to beat that heat. Yep. If it's going to auction, you might want to think about, look, is there plenty of shade around for those that are going to be attending the auction, or do you need to bring in a small marquee just to make the environment a little bit more comfortable? Have plenty of water available. You know, hydration's always good to create that environment, and try and keep it as cool as possible.
Yeah, don't bake a cake or put the fire on.
Very true.
Not right now.
Hand out the ice creams. Charles, I mean, does that make the difference, having shade around, having water? Does that really change the psychology of the
I think
buyer?
it does. If you think about it, if you're going out to dinner somewhere and you're sitting in an environment and it's too hot, you feel it and you don't enjoy it. And I think it's all the same. If I go to an open for inspection, I expect the air conditioning to be on. A good agent's have got a bottle of water waiting there for me. It's fresh, the curtains are open, everything's happening in the right environment, because the environment is critical.
Yep.
So, guys, is it going to be a buyer's year or a seller's year this year?
Yeah, look, without doubt the market's a little bit more subdued, but there's still good buyer demand out there if the property's priced right and well presented. And I think in terms of stock, we're seeing a bit more supply come onto the market. So I think we're sort of at a bit of a crossroads where it's good for buyers, and it's also good for sellers. If you purchased 5 years ago, you're still getting good growth over that period of time, even though the market's dropped off a little bit. So I think win-win for both.
Particularly, as you mentioned, if you're going to see those people moving out of that rental market, the only place to go is into a buyer's market from there.
Yeah, and it is. And when they do, it's going to put pressure on investors as well. So that's why I say the rental movement may come down. But I always talk about this thing, and people get sick of me saying it, but that's just too bad. I'm going to say it again. There are only ever two types of markets we're ever in. One where we get the buyer up to meet the vendor's ridiculously high price, and that's what they call a boom. And the other where we get the seller down to meet what the seller thinks is the purchaser's ridiculously low offer, and that's called real estate. And that's what we're in 90% of the time.
Of course. Derek, your thoughts?
Market is the market. I think it's going to be a good 2018. I think you'll see Sydney remain fairly flat. Tasmania will continue to grow. I think we're starting to see some good demand in WA. I think coastal areas such as Ballarat, Geelong, Wollongong, Central Coast and Newcastle will grow, and that's due to population growth because of the lifestyle and affordability in terms of location. I think, as Charles said, I think you'll start to see more and more mum and dad investors probably pull out of the investment market due to higher interest rates and changes to legislation, increased in taxes. In terms of interest rates locally, I think the forecast is that Australia is going to remain flat with a cash rate of about 1.5%. It hasn't changed, I think, since August 2016. Charles, you might correct me on that. But we do have to be mindful in terms of what happens in the US. They're forecasting 2 to 3 increases this year, and generally what happens there is it passes on to the Australian market, as banks like to protect their margins.
We have to be competitive in that area. So I think 2018 is very similar to what you've described, and I think, again, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for people this year. I think the people who are selling should be looking, if they're studying social media, they should be looking for the real estate agents with properties that they've sold, not agents that have properties for sale, because you want to be with the agents that have had success, not those who are talking about how successful they're going to be.
That's always the thing that I look at. If I see a sold board, who sold it?
That's
and it is always a similar names in that similar area, and presumably that's who you want to be going with as well.
The people who have less to sell.
Absolutely. Well, Charles, it is time to say farewell to you. Thank you, as always, for your insights this evening. It's time now to take a short break. Coming up, we're going to be taking a look at the most expensive properties to sell in 2017. Don't miss it.